All right, everybody, welcome back. Thank you for hustling back here. It's going to be, your time is going to be rewarded by our next guest, Liesl Copland. She is an agent working in the world of distribution and new media. She's selling something like 10 or 8 films here at the Toronto Film Festival. We had her at the very first doc conference where she gave a talk that I think you can still find online. Well, I know you can still find online. Maybe, yeah. What was the title of it, if they want to Google it?
Dear theater owners, something about not having any fear.
Dear theater owners, something about not having any fear. You know, Google Liesl Copland TIFF doc conference IndieWire. You'll find it. I trust this room to be full of good researchers. Anyways, she has a talk and PowerPoint presentation that's about 20 minutes long. If we've got any time left, we will take a couple questions. We're very pleased to have her back. Please welcome Liesl Copland.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thanks for everyone for being here. I'm super excited to be here. When Tom asked me to come back to the TIFF doc conference, as he mentioned, I've been here once before, and talk with you today, I got really excited because I think that all of you in the room, the documentarians in the film space, are among the true content pioneers. You have the most constraints on your medium with regards to budgets, number of buyers, et cetera, and you're forced to be super knowledgeable and crafty. And I would wager that makes you innovative. You're lucky because your audience meets you halfway, actively viewing your content on the latest platform and engaging with you wherever you may go. So I thought if I came to talk to you today with a little bit of information, some trends I see in your space, maybe a few hunches, as well as some data, you might be able to help overcome some inefficiencies that might exist in our space at large. So you guys may have seen, you can switch to the first slide, a New York Times article. Ooh, I forgot I have my clicker. Thank you very much. I feel so much power. Can I do it? Let's see. Oh, too much. There we go. So some of you may have seen in the New York Times an article a couple of Sundays ago that profiled one of the largest consumer information gathering companies in the world of big data, the Acxiom Corporation. Acxiom, founded by a former Microsoft executive, Scott Howe, has done something novel and perhaps a little bit counterintuitive. Acxiom created a website called aboutthedata.com that allows you and I to view our consumer profiles, all of that information that is secretly gathered every time we make a purchase and that advertisers are eager to know so that they can target us with their products. Now, on the site, you can carefully view your profile and engage with that data about you, editing it to better reflect your consumer behavior, and even choose to opt out of being tracked by Acxiom completely if you wish. An industry that's known for its lack of transparency, I found this truly disruptive on Acxiom's part. By crowdsourcing consumer behavior, Acxiom hopes to breed efficiencies that advertisers have dreamed of, and that will make us as consumers less annoyed by those targeted ads because they might actually be of service to us. So I decided to check it out for myself. When I looked up my own profile, I realized that the system isn't flawless. For instance, Acxiom pegged me as a high-volume, low-end retail purchaser, which I was truly hurt by, considering that I've spent a considerable portion of my life's income stocking my closet well beyond my means with upscale retail items. So I decided to engage the data despite my pain, and I let Acxiom know that I am actually an upscale retail purchaser for one. And after answering a few more questions and filling in some fields and making some changes to my personal information, I suddenly realized that it was kind of fun. And not only that, it's revolutionary because I was playing a role in crafting my consumer identity. So this two-way and participatory nature of where consumerism and data mining is going was sold to me in an instant. And while our personal data is certainly a hot-button issue these days, I have to give Acxiom credit for bringing the consumer under the tent when it comes to their data-gathering goals. So as you see, I highlighted here this novel public relations strategy of openness. And the last quote that Mr. Howe makes at the bottom of the second box is, you have to make things visible. And that's what I want to talk about today in our field. I think a lot about data and how it relates to our business. And as we're all too aware, it can be the currency for how our projects ultimately get off the ground. I got this bug, as I mentioned the last time I gave the talk that Tom mentioned here in 2009, when I worked for Netflix. Seeing film lovers put movies in their queue when festival awards were announced halfway around the world sparked both my inner data geek and opened my eyes to where movie consumption, particularly documentary viewing, is going. This big opaque world of digital media, clearly here to stay, has been a boon to the indie filmmaker, as our ideas can be easily connected with our audiences who prove among the most passionate out there. And what we know is that viewership for indies and for documentaries in particular has increased rapidly over the recent years on home entertainment platforms and all devices via services like Netflix, iTunes, Hulu, and Amazon, as well as via a perhaps growing new crop of digitally enabled platforms. As early as in the funding stage, perhaps in that crowdsourcing category I mentioned in 2009, pretty good, and all the way through the consumption end on platforms like VHX and Chill, which maybe you've heard about and maybe you haven't. But those great services are very enabling to the documentary, and I encourage you to take a look at them. Your audience goes into the crowdsourcing field, for instance, and it can go onto VHX. And the novel thing about those platforms and the way they engage with the users is it captures at least their email address as well as other information that the user might be willing, as I was, to give them. So the great thing about data is it also has started to enable the theatrical world. Services like Gather and Tug, which I'm sure all of you out there, the researchers that Tom mentioned, know a lot about, is another place where email addresses and more can be filling the inboxes of all of you filmmakers out there, as well as linking to you becoming your followers, and hence giving you and the doc audience such documentary titles as Indie Game, Sound City, Girl Rising, and Regeneration. So along the path of innovation, the new undoubtedly favors the documentary. And the documentarian for their audiences are passionate, as I mentioned, leaning in, eager to eventize, and highly gatherable, and increasingly interested in seeing all the great stories that you filmmakers are compelled to tell. So back to the Axiom Corporation. Again, where I found that article reassuring was that I hope it might mean a new age of clarity to all of us here in the film business who really desperately need it. But not all platforms are created equal with regard to the data they offer, and hence the title of this talk today, Digital on Demand, Show Us the Numbers. My goal here is to give you a snapshot of data tracking in the digital space now, what we're missing, and to offer up some solutions for how we can get closer to that novel idea of openness in our own space. So of course the motion picture business is no stranger to data. We use a lot of consumer research, MPG theater test screenings, Rent Track home video numbers, Nielsen ratings, NRG awareness, and intent to view, online tracking, exit polling, focus groups, and there seems to be a measurement system at every point in a film's lifespan. The studios and agencies like mine pick our poison and try to get ahead of the new ones that come from the valley and from these media giants, and the world goes around. But there are some massive analytic black holes that we, the buyers, sellers, and content creators out there in the audience, cannot see into. And sadly, they are where our largest audiences right now are gathering. Where we are receiving some data, there is no uniform reporting or universal tracking system, and hence we don't have the clarity along every step in the chain. And I think we can usher in a new film data age that would allow us to really do something with all of that information. So you also might have noticed in the past couple weeks, oops, wrong way. Has anyone seen this talk out there? Okay. We'll link to it. I'll make sure Tom can get it all to you. There was a viral video, I think when we took this picture, it was over 1 million views, that I feel is really relevant to our discussion about data and content. Oscar, now Emmy-nominated actor Kevin Spacey, gave this talk at the Edinburgh Television Conference discussing his experience getting House of Cards off the ground at Netflix. Now, Kevin Spacey sort of, to me, embodies the bridge between old media and new. He's the artistic director of the Old Vic Theatre Company in London and a co-founder of Trigger Street Productions, which he founded with social media and digital entrepreneur Dana Brunetti. That production company was involved, as you may know, in the much-discussed series House of Cards. And if you haven't seen the talk, I encourage you to watch it. One of the most interesting things he said was when he, Beau Willimon, and David Fincher met with all the networks pitching the series House of Cards, and of course he mentions everybody wanted it, something unique happened at Netflix. The execs at Netflix said to them, and I quote, "We looked inside our data and know our subscribers will enjoy your series. We believe in you." So a point that should be very compelling to all of you content creators, Spacey notes the difference between the traditional TV pilot model and the straight-to-series or House of Cards model. He implied that there would naturally be a different product at the end of these two processes, which by the very fact of how they operate and strive for success. So let me take you through it. Netflix greenlights an entire series, maybe 13 episodes, all at once. They release them all at once to their audience, and they trust, therefore, that the audience is going to allow the story to play out over time. In the traditional pilot model, which some of you may be familiar with, networks order a bit more than, say, 100 pilots a season. They air about a third of them and decide what they will send to series based on the reaction to more or less one block of either 22 or 44 minutes versus 13 episodes, which we mentioned a minute ago. So the makers of TV pilots have to describe everything that's at stake, define all of the characters and their motivations, and wow and cliffhanger their way to a positive response from execs and audiences and focus groups in under an hour. Meanwhile, the full season approach allows for and recognizes that it can be afforded more patience from the audience and perhaps some more innovation in their storytelling. So Spacey talks a lot more in the talk about audience, how focus groups almost tanked series House of Blues for all the wonderful characteristics that made it so unique, successful and award-winning, and draws our attention to both The Sopranos and Seinfeld, who he says developed audiences over 4 or 5 seasons before reaching their peak. Point being, sometimes content needs time to connect with its core audience. And sometimes that might not even happen, in the case of a film or TV series, in its primary release window. So at the recent season premiere of AMC's Breaking Bad, the accumulation of audience from the series picked up speed over the past 4 seasons because that series enjoyed great success on Netflix as well. And this isn't a Netflix sort of infomercial talk. I'm going to talk a lot about the other platforms as well. But the idea and the phenomenon when Breaking Bad premiered in early August on AMC was they experienced never-before-seen high ratings. And that phenomenon was called the Netflix effect because of how long those other seasons had spent on Netflix reaching audiences for the first time. So people are watching things out of time, as we know, on demand, but that fact, which we may not know, is giving the content more of a chance. And the point is, the data set inside these services could pay dividends then to us finding our audience, and filling the coffers and allowing our great content to succeed both audience-wise and monetarily. So we know that both Netflix and the networks have data. How is it different? Netflix has developed a more complex data set around film and television content that they have built within their own engineering ranks for over a decade. They know everything you and I like as long as we have been subscribers. They know if you consistently rate content from different genres, high or low. And for everyone out there, I want you to know, they also know if you're watching Breasts, a documentary, in the middle of the day at the office. And I don't know if anyone saw it, but they released a little infomercial commercial online. They even know if you're cheating on your spouse. Has anybody seen these ads, the Netflix adultery ads? So what I can envision must have happened is an engineer in their Silicon Valley offices this isn't published, but I can imagine this is how this came about, who was puzzled at the behavior, let's say, in certain households where certain episodes were viewed twice, maybe at the beginning of a binge, and somehow intuited that it meant that someone in the household couldn't wait to get further ahead in the series. Perhaps, like I often do, my husband went to sleep and I watched an episode of one of my favorite shows. But then they had to watch it again because they didn't want to let their spouse know that they had already seen it. So they uncovered that half of their viewership, they said, was committing Netflix adultery. So the networks, by comparison, think about it. You're home watching a television series. What does that television set know about you? Networks don't have the same sophisticated level of data about you. They don't have the ability to see all of the different series you're watching. They certainly can't follow you to the office to see if what you're watching on your computer. And they definitely don't have a clue what you're passionate about, evidenced by binging or a willingness to sit through an episode twice to keep your marriage alive, or whether you give a series or a film a 2 or 5-star rating. So somewhere there is some great data in all of the system, but what is present and available to you and I today is not enough. It's the complexity of the data and the ability to relate it to data about other content and to itself across various platforms that will ultimately allow creatives like many of you in this room the opportunity to make better content. So where are we with gaining access to all of this? While we have insight into some of this data, the reporting hasn't evolved within the rapidly increasing viewership patterns at the same rate. There is still no uniform reporting system that aggregates all data on, say, a film or documentary and pours it all into one trackable system regardless of where the piece of content might be viewed. Here's a brief primer on how home viewing has been traditionally measured. At the outset of home viewing, the ad-supported model took hold, and TV rung in a long era reigned over by the Nielsen system, the barometer by which ads are sold and series are judged still today. As the VHS and DVD came to bear, viewership tracking adapted to include DVD rental and sales. With a rent-track subscription, like my company has, you can pull up most of the market of a DVD's life or a film in box office. And on the DVD, unfortunately, you can access the Walmart numbers, but overall, the system is an accurate measurement tool. But as we all know, home viewing has shifted from an ad-supported model to one of digital transactions and subscription viewing. And there's no ratings equivalent in this space, no title-specific tracking system available to all data subscribers about on demand. Cable VOD viewership is tracked, and I have some numbers to share on that with you in a minute, but for the moment, the space is the equivalent to a landfill in an earthquake. Performance across all media at a title level is unavailable, and all the patterns go haywire. We, as the subscribers or needers of the data, can't track across platform. We can get data on our own titles, and distribution companies have data on their titles, and television networks have data on their titles, but they don't have data on each other's titles. And I might need to come to a festival like this, for instance, and say, I'm selling a film like the great Midway film you're going to hear about in a little while, and look into these systems and see performance data and audience data on films that I might say are similar to that film. That would help me sell the film. That would help me make the financiers recoup their money. That would make me help you to reach your career goals. But I can't access it. So if you're lucky enough to be on the other side of a release of a movie, you may have some data as well. The accounting statement is a hefty tool in this fuzzy world, but in many ways, information actually gets even more confusing and frustrating because the data in an accounting statement, or rather what the revenues are from all of these platforms and windows, is lumped imperceptibly together into a few seemingly simple categories that aren't telling us enough. We have dollars, not real performance information. For instance, we don't know if more people bought a film at $2.99 or $12.99. We don't know if they loved it so much that they had to own a digital copy or if they just were happy to stream it. And we don't know if it over-indexed on iTunes, like maybe a Conan O'Brien Can't Stop, or Marley, found more of an audience on cable VOD, like maybe Joan Rivers, or whether it ran a more or less consistent audience evergreen on a platform like Hulu, say like Super Size Me. So I'm not citing actual title performance data here, but I am making educated guesses because I look, again, very deeply at this space. But that's just the point. I look very closely at this space, and I am guessing. If we could make even the simplest of connections, we could learn things. But of course, the platforms are learning, and the scariest part of it all is that they are learning how much to pay for our content. I think that one of the reasons why this lack of reporting gets little attention is because if you look at the digital space in general, and by that I'm referring primarily to the web, the metrics business has thrived in recent years. Dozens of information systems like ComScore, Mass Relevance, Google Analytics, Cloud, Content ID, Zephyr have all cropped up that literally measure every click of online activity, every video, every tweet, every Facebook post, official or fan, and every shade of gray of relevance among tastemakers. But when comparing these tools to what is available on the on-demand platforms we're discussing today, the black holes are overwhelming. So let's take a look at what we know. VOD, I'm sure everyone has talked about in film festivals over the past number of years, has been a boon to the independent space. There was an article the other day in the Wrap that mentioned that it might finally be hitting its bust because there's so much content there that the discoverability problem suddenly pushes independent content like it used to in the video store to a place of not as much relevance. But what we see in some of these slides here is that VOD is continuing to experience growth. Set-top boxes have jumped to 41 million, which means essentially half the country is watching VOD on cable. 8.9 billion transactions in 2012, 78 of which were free, 19% which were subscription, and only 3% were transactional on demand. Just remember that 3% for a moment. Not surprising, among free content, the TV entertainment category is a leader with over 2.3 billion transactions and 1.3 billion hours of viewing in 2012. The availability of more long-form content is driving the categories of growth. Extending IP value over free on demand, or even subscription like we learned with Breaking Bad, enables the audience to catch up. I don't know if you've followed, the ad-supported model now has a 3-day, 5-day, 7-day catch-up as far as what the ratings are. This has been very substantial to the ad business and to sustaining that Nielsen model. If we look a little bit at subscription, and these are the 3 subscription VOD online providers, we see a lot of activity on the monthly pay model. Netflix has over 37 million global subscribers on streaming. Hulu Plus, 4 million, available now on more than 350 million mobile connected devices. Amazon Prime, 10 million subscribers, and so on. In 2012, Prime members accounted for roughly 4% of Amazon's active consumer base, but they accounted for 10% of purchases, and they spend twice as much as non-Prime subscribers on the whole Amazon platform. iTunes is a little bit different. It's not a subscription service. It's a hardware and transactional platform, but it's practically ubiquitous. And some of those VOD numbers on your accounting statements are coming from rental on iTunes. Appletune's iTunes Music Store is now home to 577 million users, adding nearly 500,000 accounts a day. At its current rate, Apple will add another 100 million iTunes accounts by the end of this year and have served up over 15 billion media downloads. But you and I don't know anything about this. We don't know anything about iTunes because other than what the analysts and Apple tells us, and we can't aggregate what Apple or Samsung or any tablet manufacturer or phone manufacturer is telling us other than what they're telling us about themselves. So those are official Apple stats that I show you here. Oops. So point being, there's a lot that we're missing. Consumer behavior varies greatly across these platforms and is measurable against entirely different things. At the moment, cable VOD has virtually no user experience, no algorithm offering more movies similar to those you have watched or paid for, no metadata, no trailer, no text about a movie, no thumbnail image, none of that. People lament it's an alphabetical list of titles that gets put into folders. Your content doesn't deserve to be in folders. To put it mildly, discoverability is a bitch. Now, of course, the cable companies are working on this because they too would love to be able to serve up more transactions by title than that 3%, because that's where the real margin is, that's where the real money is. But believe me, business will grow when discoverability gets better. By comparison, Netflix allows you and your household to curate your own content library. Amazon can correlate film recommendations to things you purchase and read. Oh, and it controls the Internet Movie Database, which is a sleeping giant of a film network. iTunes has a ton of information on price and sensitivity around content, but you and I can't access this information about our very own films, our own ideas. All this data that exists, and we still can't see it or cross-reference it across different films or different platforms, it is truly an oversight whose time to end has come. Because we, in this room, can't have any leverage in a market if we don't have access to this information. Simply stated, the player that controls the information has the upper hand on a deal. We're missing out on opportunities here, and transparency breeds efficiency. It shows what's working and what isn't. I'm aiming it in the wrong place. There we go. It shows, like I said, what's working and what isn't. It shows where audiences go, where they go after they watch, to whom they tweet, to who they post, and where they share. Consumers should want this because right now the studios are only relying on their own data, making for poorly researched greenlight decisions. Studios should want this because they will be able to access their competitors' data as well as their own. And the data companies should certainly want this because it will maintain their relevance and hence increase their revenue in this new content ecosystem. The technology exists, but perhaps the will does not. Right now, huge deals are being structured between these platforms and the studios. Libraries of content are being turned over, and so far to my knowledge, no deal has included the rights to see detailed consumption and viewership data on a mass reporting level inside these systems. I don't think anyone wants to diminish the huge expenditure that these companies, both financially and intellectually, have gone to create their products and algorithms and gather all this consumer information that helps them grow their businesses. But it seems unfair that the audience and the people who are creating this content are boxed out of learning about their own audiences. And for filmmakers like you, this can be maddening, considering that at every film festival panel you've ever been to, execs like me are telling you, know your audience. You have the power to track audiences through social media, ask for their emails, encourage them to tell their friends about your project, and ultimately tap into their networks. But where people are consuming it, you don't have access. Now, this is where I envision the utopian future that I have to believe will eventually become a reality. Imagine we will one day track a film's audience from the very first point of discovery, say here at TIFF. We will follow it through theaters, gaining audiences and emails, pick up who watched the trailer on the TIFF website, pick up who bought tickets, and have them come along with us for the ride. We'll see who voted 5 stars on some app that knows that they left the theater and then tweeted about it, causing an additional 25 people to see the film the next day. Following this pattern through exhibition, VOD, all the other platforms and distribution windows, or possibly reach back to the film's crowdfunding campaign and discern who the film's most influential evangelists were, is information that we need. Then we can use this data to cross-reference it against other films with either similar or entirely different characteristics to uncover what audiences are responding to. I don't think my utopian future is very far off. And as far as docs in particular, very much of the beneficiary of these new technologies, the present is bright. The same week that Axiom and Spacey hit the web, The Economist published this article that you see here about the rise of documentary films in the UK. One point you'll find, if you read this article, particularly interesting, is that many of you, I'm sure, have read, is that Netflix is now producing documentaries and moving further into original content. But the article, moreover, is about the new health in the documentary space, and in this case, focused on the UK. The genre, it says, has been making better content, a, quote, new breed of theatrically minded, more commercially viable documentaries, and the numbers in the UK are growing. So I wondered about the numbers in North America, and I did a little digging. The numbers are growing year over year here as well. And one theory is that day and date, VOD with theatrical releases are bringing a large number of docs and films in general into a small number of theaters for a brief time to create awareness for a multi-platform release. But nonetheless, we're on the rise. And since we know docs do so well on all these platforms now, all we need is the data to have the perfect system. So how could we engender this utopia even more? Books have something called an ISBN number. And every single product you've purchased today or the past week has a UPC code or some sort of tracking system associated with it. So why the bleep hasn't the movie business been able to come up with some sort of equivalent? Why isn't there some sort of universal code or content watermark that follows the shelf life of a film and provides us with valuable information along the way? Tracks the trailer views, tracks the people come to the theaters, tracks it every step of the pattern. What that would mean, it sounds a little difficult, right? Let's think about it. You have to take the whole AFI catalog, every movie ever made, you have to scan it in somewhere. I mean, who would do something like that, right? A Herculean task, to say the least. Maybe something like mapping the human genome or every street corner on the planet. If I had access to the web, I could show you the front of my house right now. Hello, Google. Or cataloging every book ever put into print. Something completely insurmountable like that. So what can we do until this impossible task becomes possible? And this is my imploring to all of you in the room today. Know where data is gathering. Crowdfund on sites like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, where you can engage directly with super passionate early adopters, your alpha audience and mavens who are going to evangelize for you later. Get their email addresses, bring them along for the ride. Keep them engaged, and watch your social footprint grow. Use new platforms. They are favoring documentaries. Those documentaries I mentioned that worked very well on VHX earlier are very exciting to me, and the metadata and the information and the fluidity with which that platform and others like it, like Chill, et cetera, are working, favor your early adopter audience. So use new platforms. Help improve user interface. If you have the opportunity to make a Kickstarter campaign or create a website for your movie, think about the user interface and the lacking in some of these platforms that I mentioned. Cable promises to improve beyond the alphabetical list, but if you look at some of these other examples, you'll see an example of what something might look like. Control your metadata and input it somewhere. If you make information about your film available to track into the system, it will inform through the chain. IMDb comes from Without a Box. If you use a Without a Box account to put your movie into a festival or apply to a film festival, that gets sucked into IMDb. That's where all that data comes from. So recognize we have a wiki in the film business and use it. Share information. Go create a wiki of reporting. Share with your friends and colleagues the information about how films are doing. And perhaps then we can start to think about what a uniform reporting and metric system might look like. Ask that your accounting statements given to you by your distributors be more detailed and more broken down, and don't rest until you get real performance metrics from the companies you are trusting with your films. And someone listening, please invent the universal content SKU, okay? I'm over it, I'm telling you. We need that content watermarking, we need that technology. Every other business pretty much has it. If you're a member of a guild, think long and hard about the negotiations coming up in 2014. Many of the big platforms that control a lot of your audience are not at the table in those rooms and don't have, as we've seen, a uniform contract with the studios, as well as a uniform data reporting system. This near future transparency could have a watershed moment in those negotiations where monetization of new media is likely to rear its head again as a hot button issue. You can start having an impact on the metadata that's out there about movies right now, here at this film festival. Ask your festival coordinator what you can learn from the behavior of the audience here and on the TIFF website. Find out how many trailer views you have and if anything came from it. And share and share and share. All of this information should be part of the conversation. Hollywood is woefully behind, but with a little ingenuity and passion from all of your innovators, we can catch up and eventually surpass the present reality. I'm very optimistic and deeply believe in the possibility of a clear, transparent reporting model that gives us visibility into everything. One that makes us smarter and better at making movies, frees up the artist, creates more engaged moviegoers who are eager to support fresh voices. And I'm happy to have a little, but I don't hope I have to have too much patience. Thank you so much.
You have to go.
Okay, good.
Liesl now has to go sell a film. So thank you very much, Liesl Copland.